Prime Minister Narendra Modi virtually addressed the annual UN General Assembly on 26 September 2020. He addressed the 75th session of the UNGA in Hindi. PM Modi questioned for how long will India, the world's largest democracy and home to 1.3 billion people, be kept out of the decision-making structures of the United Nations, asserting that reform in the responses, processes and in the very character of the global body is the need of the hour. At one side, PM Modi ignored Pakistan and China in his speech. Indian delegates at the UN exposed Pakistan with their strong right to replies. Hours after Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan raised the Kashmir issue in the 75th United Nations General Assembly on Friday, India promptly responded to Khan's comments and requested the United Nations for the floor to exercise right to reply in response to Pakistan's statements. Indian delegate Majido Veneto, who had earlier walked out of the hall when Imran Khan's pre-recorded statement was played, presented India's stand.
Mr. President, I am exercising India's right of reply to the diatribe that we heard this morning from the Prime Minister of Pakistan. Mr. President, this August forum witnessed today a new low on its 75th anniversary. The leader of Pakistan today called for those who incite hate and violence to be outlawed. But, as he went on, we were left wondering, was he referring to himself? This hall heard the incessant rant of someone who had nothing to show for himself, who had no achievements to speak of, and no reasonable suggestion to offer to the world. Instead, we saw lies, misinformation, warmongering, and malice spread through this assembly. The words used today at this great assembly by the leader of Pakistan demean the very essence of the United Nations. For a nation that is deeply buried in medievalism, it is understandable that the tenets of a modern civilized society, such as peace, dialogue, and diplomacy, are far-fetched. Allow me, Mr. President, to jog their minds a little about the stellar record of Pakistan. This is the country that brought genocide to South Asia 39 years back when it killed its own people. This is also the country that is shameless enough not to offer a sincere apology for the horrors it perpetrated even after so many years. This is the same country that provides pensions for dreaded and listed terrorists out of state funds. This is the same country that has the dubious distinction of hosting the largest number of terrorists proscribed by the United Nations. The leader whom we heard today is the same person who referred to the terrorist Osama bin Laden as a martyr in his parliament in July. The same leader who spewed venom today admitted in 2019 in public in the US that his country still has about 30,000 to 40,000 terrorists who have been trained by Pakistan and have fought in Afghanistan and in the Indian Union territory of Jammu and Kashmir. This is the country that has systematically cleansed its minorities, including Hindus, Christians, Sikhs, and others.
In India's second right to reply, Indian diplomat Pavan Bhatt at UNHRC exposes Pakistan for killing hundreds of its minorities, journalists, and human rights defenders.
No fabricated words against India is going to change the fact that Pakistan and territories under its control are death traps for journalists, human rights defenders, social activists, and religious and ethnic minorities. Perennial India-bashing project of Pakistan in the UN system is also not going to change the fact that hundreds of journalists and human rights defenders die each year in Pakistan due to systematic killings, including extrajudicial ones. Incessant attempts to maligning India in all international forums is not going to change the fact that tens of thousands of minorities would not stop fleeing Pakistan. Resorting to abusive and unacceptable language against India in this August forum can't rectify Pakistan's dubious human rights record. Mr. Vice President, Pakistan's India-focused agenda demonstrates its own hollowness when it comes to accountability and justice for oppressing those standing for their rights. The pathetic state of affairs for journalists and human rights defenders is well known when the deep state could make prominent journalists disappear in broad daylight at the heart of Pakistan. We only could imagine the fate of those journalists and human rights defenders in territories under its control. Silence is the apt word for them affected through enforced disappearances, murders, detentions, custodial deaths, and torture in Balochistan, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Sindh, and Pakistan-occupied parts of Indian Union territories of Jammu, Kashmir, and Ladakh. Mr. Vice President, while the world has progressed well, Pakistan is still at the crossroads to understand the real meaning of modern laws, democracy, and human rights. The language of accountability, civic space, fundamental freedoms, public participation is yet to find resonance with the authorities of Pakistan. Of course, the world has witnessed the history of Pakistan where voice of dissent is brutally muzzled without fail. Mr. Vice President, we are not baffled that Pakistan does well when it comes to inciting hatred against religious minorities and targeting our leadership with hate speeches. Its well-cherished and inherited culture of hatred makes it the perfect candidate for carrying forward the legacy of intolerance against anybody having modern views on human rights. Mr. Vice President, Pakistan should not make mockery of this August forum when it attempts to self-crown as an ardent supporter of political dissidents, journalists, social activities, minorities, and human rights defenders. It should be a matter of concern for the Council that Pakistan has been continuously misusing this August forum for malicious propaganda against my country. None of Pakistan's veiled accusations against India could stifle the voice of the minorities and people under its subjugation. The fate of religious and ethnic minorities is well known when beheading is the only option in Pakistan in exchange for freedom of religion. Various international organizations have termed Pakistan as the killing field for minorities. The Ahmadis remains the most persecuted community in Pakistan under the aegis of the so-called Constitution of Pakistan. Hundreds of Christians are persecuted every year, while maximum of them are subjected to violent deaths in Pakistan. Madam Vice President, it's deplorable that Pakistan has institutionalized enforced disappearance as a tool of subjugation against dissent and criticism, not just against individuals, but against the entire society. Children as young as 12 years old in Balochistan, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and Sindh are normally abducted and trained to be suicide bombers. In a chilling reminder to what Pakistan is capable of, ministers of Pakistan proudly call for another full-scale genocide against Balochis to resolve the political crisis in Balochistan. Madam Vice President, unfortunately, the statistics and data from international organizations has demonstrated that Pakistan is also a minefield for journalists and human rights defenders. Murder, harassment, assault are the wages for independent journalists in Pakistan's so-called democracy. Madam Vice President, Pakistan's deceit and hypocrisy is best demonstrated when it orchestrated mass influx of Pakistan-occupied parts of Indian Union territories of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh through discriminatory domicile laws. It's baffling that there are 3 outsiders for every 4 in Pakistan-occupied parts of Indian UTs of Jammu, Kashmir and Ladakh. While civil, political and constitutional rights are non-existent in Pakistan-occupied parts of the Indian Union territories of Jammu, Kashmir and Ladakh, deliberate economic policies have also subjugated them to a life of extreme poverty. A simple demand of land rights could lead to imprisonment for 40 years, as has been the fate for political activists such as Baba Jan and others. In contrast, full-scale training camps and launch pads of terrorists are being escalated in Pakistan-occupied parts of Indian Union territories of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh at great expense.
Apart from India, Veronica Ekelund, research analyst European Foundation for South Asian Studies, during 45th session of UNHRC, asks, why is Pakistan still a member of UN Human Rights Council?
Madam President, respect for human rights is universal and paramount and applies to all countries, including Pakistan, and terrorism inherently undermines the promotion and protection of human rights. Talking to CNN in February 2019, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi admitted that UN-designated terrorist and chief of Jaish-e-Mohammed Masood Azhar resides in Pakistan. To BBC in March 2019, Mr. Qureshi confessed that his government and Jaish-e-Mohammed maintained official contact. In July 2019, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan told the U.S. Institute of Peace in Washington that his country hosts 40,000 terrorists. In June 2020, Prime Minister Imran Khan referred to Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden as a martyr in the country's parliament. Last month, Pakistan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs acknowledged the presence of UN-designated terrorist Dawood Ibrahim on its territory. Madam President, there is no need to elaborate. Pakistani officials have time and again confessed the country continues to be a safe haven for terrorists and terrorist organizations. The UN Security Council's consolidated list of terrorist individuals and entities includes 146 entries from Pakistan. With all due respect, I am compelled to ask, why is Pakistan still a member of this August Council? Thank you.